The world is changing. Have we witnessed the death of the missions trip?
There's definitely a mindset among many that go on these trips as it's spiritual tourism. But for us to turn away from using short-term missions would be kind of like shutting the doors to our local churches, because there are some churches that just do entertainment. We don't close the doors of our church and stop gathering as the body, nor should we stop going and serving globally as the body.
Our own Jason Phillips of ABWE joins us as we take a critical look at the state of short-term missions coming up. But first, let me tell you about Daniel. Daniel fled his home in Peru when he was 12 years old after his drunken father threatened to kill him. Daniel became an alcoholic like his father. One day, he ended up at a local church. But as a Roman Catholic from his upbringing, Daniel resisted the evangelical gospel that he heard and vowed to disprove Christianity itself. Well, that didn't last long. Daniel was converted, and he developed a passion to share the gospel with the lost. That's when ABWE missionary Steve Douglas noticed and began discipling him for 9 years. Today, Daniel has founded a seminary in his city of Arequipa, and he's planted 15 churches of his own. Daniel's special, but he's not unique. We're finding partners like these all over the world. And in this changing global climate, we can continue to do greater things for the Great Commission by partnering with people on the field, already risking all to make disciples. Your gift to the Global Gospel Fund can impact 1,000 missionaries working in more than 70 nations. Become a partner now. Go to abwe.org/globalgospelfund20. That's abwe.org/globalgospelfund20.
Have you ever been approached by a student expressing a missionary call? For the last 15 years, Spurgeon College's Fusion program has been equipping students for missions through life-on-life discipleship, college coursework, and intensely practical training. If you know a student desiring to become a missionary, send them to Fusion at Spurgeon College as their next step. To learn more about how we are equipping students for a lifetime, visit spurgeoncollege.com/fusion.
Welcome to the Missions Podcast, the show that explores your hard questions on missions, theology, and practice to help goers think and thinkers go. I'm Alex Kochman, Director of Advancement and Communications for ABWE, joined again, as always, by Scott Dunford, West Coast Advancement Coordinator for ABWE. And Scott, you are coming to us from a rather echoey, empty room. You might consider explaining to our listeners why that is.
We have breaking news here, Alex. I'm in a warehouse in the state of Pennsylvania, and I've just discovered lots of missing ballots. It's unreal.
Well then.
That is not what you were expecting me to say. No, we are. I'm in the process of moving church buildings, and I'm sitting here in an empty office, and as you can hear, there's nothing to absorb the sound. So this isn't the greatest location for recording, but hopefully by next week, it'll be perfect.
Yes, perfect. And it's funny, I'm also in an empty office. I'm only moving across the hallway here in our building. And I am also in the state of Pennsylvania. And I've also discovered a massive trove of discarded ballots. That last part may not be true.
Did you sign an affidavit?
Yeah. Hey, this is as good as any testimony, right? Before we get ourselves in too much trouble here, why don't we introduce our guest here, coming to us from a different location entirely, and coming to us from Atlanta, we have Jason Phillips, Executive Director of, I'm not even sure how to introduce you, Jason. Why don't you introduce yourself and to those within the ABWE family, but also outside of it, all of our podcast listeners. We get to work with you at ABWE now, and you're taking on an exciting new ministry with us. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Alex. It's great to be here with you and Scott. As Alex said, my name is Jason Phillips. I'm the Executive Director over ABWE's short-term mission trip ministry, and I've recently joined ABWE in September to be able to put some focus towards creating new processes and working with our field missionaries and our ministry partners to try to utilize this wonderful tool of short-term mission trips to help expand ministry and transform the lives of the participants and build deeper relationships and potentially even help people understand God's call in their life to long-term missions.
I love it. And Scott, one thing that you and I have not talked about in a little bit on the show, but it almost goes without saying, right now in the day and age of COVID, short-term missions has not come to a screeching halt, but in many places it's certainly been put on hold. And earlier this year was at a pretty much a complete halt. You and your wife are both involved in mobilizing. Are you seeing that on your end?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's still some desire, but I mean, I know for ourselves, we were planning on going to the Philippines in January to help with a mission team that was doing their retreat and provide some training for their kids, and that got canceled. And I think that as I talk to people around involved in different ministries, both within ABWE and outside of ABWE, I think this is a pretty common thing that a lot of countries aren't accepting Americans. Even though people maybe want to go on trips, there's some places you just can't go. And so, I think we're in a very unique stage. But I'd love to hear, Jason, can you just tell us a little bit more about your background? How did you get involved with missions, and why particularly this interest in short-term mission trips?
Sure. So I've spent the last 30 years in a variety of leadership roles in both corporate and ministry organizations, served as a pastor of local church, fairly large church, around about 1,500 on Sundays, and also started a parachurch ministry with a friend that where we served in West Africa, served alongside a local church there to help plant churches and to actually build a clinic in a predominantly Muslim village. But my introduction to short-term missions came in 2007 when I took my first trip, and it was as I was on staff there at the church. I was tasked with the growing the disciple making arm of our ministry, and really that focused a lot on small groups and outreach, but we didn't really have a good missions program, even a church running that size, and so I reached out to a friend who I knew was very experienced in short-term missions, and he invited me to go along on a trip and really kind of mentored me. I was absolutely blown away at what it really the impact that it could have on someone's life to go into a different culture, to get out of your comfort zone. And that was the key, to get out of your comfort zone and allow God to really direct your steps. We can always hear people talk about missions. We can even see videos that can kind of pull on our heartstrings. And I had, of course, donated to missions activities and missionaries prior to that. But the old Chinese proverb of I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. When I finally went, and I went with the right mindset of I just want you, God, to use me and show me what you want me to see here on this trip. It just completely transformed my view of what it meant to serve alongside our brothers and sisters, to go into a different culture with the mindset of I'm not here to try to push my agenda. I'm here to see God working and how I can be used and what he can do in me. And that ended up catapulting a passion for global disciple making on my side that over the next 13 years, I've led numerous trips across 5 continents. And that also was the catapult towards me starting that parachurch ministry, at least participating in that in partnership with a friend of mine. And we saw a lot of people's lives transformed on the trips. And I know we're going to get into more details on that, but that's why I'm passionate about it, because if we have the right preparation going on the field, and then we come back with the right mindset of applying what we've seen God do through us, it can really transform everything about the way we approach seeing people the way God sees them.
Yeah.
And developing a heart for the global church.
Well, you've painted a very positive picture of short-term missions. We should also give voice to the critical side of that as well. You and I were sitting at a meal a week or two ago, and we started talking about our friend of the show, Darren Carlson, who, boy, he's sort of a rabble rouser on issues like this, you might say. He's the only person that I know who's written a lot publicly on why you should cancel your short-term missions trip, and who also leads an organization devoted to short-term missions trips. So be that as it may, he is good at calling out some of the dark underbelly of there is a multi-billion-dollar global tourism industry in the name of short-term missions. There's a lot negative that we could point to. Even just recently, there's stories like Renee Bach in the news about ways that this goes awry, and we can't get into all of that here. But there are some critiques. You go in, you go out, and it's more of a vacation experience. You're being discipled, but how much of a long-term impact are you having? So you've painted a very positive picture. Do the critics make some points that you do find compelling?
I would say that, yes, there are points to be made in books like When Helping Hurts, Toxic Charity, Darren's articles, even David Livermore's Serving with Eyes Wide Open. He paints, some really detailed strokes on things that can be negative. And I would say, absolutely, there's definitely a mindset among many that go on these trips as it's spiritual tourism. But that for us to actually turn away from using short-term missions trips, which is really a tool for ministry, for us to turn away from those would be kind of like us shutting the doors to our local churches, because there are some churches that preach a false gospel or don't preach a gospel at all and just do entertainment. That would be more of the analogy. They gather to be entertained and to be motivated in some good speech with no gospel centrality. And, we can see those from the outside, and yet we don't close the doors of our church and stop gathering as the body, nor should we stop going and serving globally as the body simply because there are some that don't truly prepare the proper way and don't go on with the right attitude of humility and flexibility and allowing God to use them and to show them the ministry. This idea of allowing the negative results to dictate what we do and don't do with a tool, really, to me, just seems short-sighted.
So that kind of begs the question then, and I know you've written on it and you've thought about it deeply. What are some of the elements then that make for a successful mission trip? And I think when we talk about success, maybe even define that success for the people that are going, but also for the missionary and for the receiving church. So what are some of those elements that go to making a trip successful and worthwhile?
Well, the first and foremost is preparation. If the people are not properly prepared for spiritually and culturally for what they're going to encounter, they can actually negatively impact the ministry on the field. And there's no doubt that we have, countless testimonies of that happening from missionaries that are friends of mine, and I'm sure friends of yours. And some of those even listening to the shows have probably had bad experiences where a group has shown up and they're just looking forward to taking some pictures with some people in some impoverished areas and seeing the sights and then being able to come home and say that they served on a mission trip. But when we actually take the time to properly prepare the participants as well as the leader, to truly prepare spiritually in prayer, spiritually in getting into the Word and helping understand kind of what our role is, and it's to be a poured out vessel to be used by Christ, and to go with the right expectations, I think is extremely important. I mean, sociologists have found that the way we anticipate a situation will influence how we engage in that situation and how we experience it. So if we can anticipate a humble posture, a flexible attitude, a desire to want to understand the culture that we're going into, then when we get on the field, we'll be properly prepared to be used not only by God for His glory, but to be then transformed as we see God using us in ways we didn't even know that He could. And that becomes a positive to the missionary and the ministry that's on the field. Then we become a positive resource that they can use for their ministry. The key here is to make sure that the ministry and the missionary are helping define what the team is doing, as opposed to the team saying, hey, we want to bring 20 people. What can we do? That's where you end up with the trips where the church building gets painted 15 times in a year because they don't want to turn away trips that want to come. And if the people are really smart on the field, they'll make sure that 15th time it's painted the color they wanted it to be painted from where it started at the beginning of the year. that to me is a waste of resource. It's a waste of time. And there's no transformation that can be had there. But when the missionary actually looks at this and takes the time to say, this is what I'm doing on the field, this is where I see God working, and then reaches out and identifies a team that can help fulfill that, whether it is, if it's a teaching ministry, then the people that come need to be able to teach, or they need to bring people who can be in the background and not teach. It can be an evangelism trip where we're passing out tracts and things like that. But the key there is as we go in the field, that we take a back seat, that we defer to the local ministry. We allow them not only to dictate what we do, but how we do it. And I can tell you firsthand, one of the things that I was always adamant about when we would, part of what we did in a village in Venezuela outside of Maracaibo was we would do a feeding ministry. And I was always adamant that nobody from my team actually passed food to a local non-believer. Instead, what we did was we walked alongside the church that we were serving with, and they were the ones that engaged in conversation because, one, they knew the language, and two, they were going to be the face that was going to be there the week after we left. Yeah. And we then would hand the food to them, that then would hand it to the person and say that God God has blessed the church, and the church wants to share with them. And then it becomes the church that's doing it versus the rich Westerners that came down for a week. Right. Little things like that, little nuances can have a big difference and a big impact.
So all of that is great, but can you give us examples of doing it that way? Is it field tested? Have you had success? Have you seen success? Have you seen that sort of long-term impact with this? Because I think it's probably easy to list the ways in which short-term missions could improve. What are some ways you've seen that lead to success?
Well, since I brought up a trip to Maracaibo, I'll use that. We took a few teams down there, and the very first team that I took down there was completely blown away. Came back with good testimonies. We had them then some of them elevated into a more difficult trip up into Sikkim, India, between Nepal and Bhutan. But more importantly, by them coming back and people seeing the difference in their lives, it created more of a passion in our church for missions. And we went from the first year that I went on staff and started building the missions ministry. We took 2 trips that year. The next year we took 6 trips. And then the next year it grew from there. And part of the people that went on these trips, going through the proper preparation, being able to apply what they had prepared to apply, it changed their hearts and opened their minds and hearts to what God might be doing through them. And they actually started parachurch ministries themselves, serving the exact people that we had gone down and served as a church. And that parachurch ministry actually still exists today. It's morphed into other areas and other things, but it all started with the person who started that ministry had never been on a short-term trip and went on a trip and got to see firsthand what it really meant to be a poured out vessel. And it impacted his life. And then he took his family and he and his wife started a ministry. Wow. That's one example. I actually have 3 other examples of people that I took on the field that actually left corporate and realized God was calling them into full-time ministry. And 2 of them went on to start their own parachurch ministries. Some of them went on staff as elders and even pastors at churches. So I have seen it work firsthand. And it's been, I would actually even say, now that I say that, there was a couple that actually went on to long-term missions careers that all cultivated from those initial trips.
Yeah. I love these success stories. I think there's more that we can do, both as senders to lead these trips better, but also for the people going to make sure that they aren't sucked into this sort of, serial, short-term offender, repeat offender sort of mentality. And so I want to get into some of those specifics, and we'll do that with Jason Phillips in just a few minutes. Cross Conference 2020 is coming. This December, gather a group of 18 to 25-year-olds in your living room or church auditorium and join the Cross 20 live stream. Your group will hear from David Platt, Trip Lee, John Piper, and others as they aim to emphasize the clarity of the gospel, the centrality of the local church, and God's heart for the nations. Registration is just $10 per person. You can learn more and register at cross20.com. Learn more again and register at cross20.com.
Hi, I'm Scott Dunford, and I'd like to share with you about a new nonprofit ministry established to help churches, Christian schools, and other ministries protect children and prevent abuse. Rich Hamar from Church Law and Tax states that the number one reason that drives churches to court is child sexual abuse. I can't think of anything more devastating to these lives, their families, and our witness before a watching world than sexual abuse that takes place in ministry. The traumatic impact often leaves the vulnerable not wanting anything to do with God or His people. Our efforts toward evangelism, discipleship, and spiritual formation are not only neutralized, but shattered. Evangelical Counsel for Abuse Prevention was formed to help ministry leaders understand the complexities of child protection and abuse prevention. They are establishing standards and an accreditation program that will help verify that appropriate measures are in place at your church or ministry. Learn more about them. Find a helpful and free assessment tool to help you see how you measure up in this area. Go to abuseprevention.org and click on the link for this resource assessment. Evangelical Counsel for Abuse Prevention.
And this June, attend the national conference. Go to abuseprevention.org and register with ABWE21 as the promo code to receive 20% off your ticket. That's promo code ABWE21 to receive 20% off. Brooks Buser, president of Radius International.
I am here with Mark Dever, senior pastor at Capitol Hill Baptist and president of 9 Marks.
When you go to a culture that's a different language than yours, you're ending up in a kind of majority language that's been reached. And there are other peoples still more hidden, and it's those people who are often almost entirely unreached, and they take more cross-cultural effort. Is there a way we can better train people to have more realistic expectations of what life is like in the kind of 2 steps away from my culture, and be able to sustain family life with its normal difficulties there, so that there can be a long years and even decades-long witness in that culture? And it seems like Radius is set up to provide that training. Radius is about reaching unreached people groups.
Go to radiusinternational.org, radiusinternational.org.
We're back with Jason Phillips, Executive Director for Short-Term Mission Trips at ABWE International. And so, Jason, I want to bring up a concern that a lot of people have about short-term mission trips, and that is you hear about people that have gone on, 6, 7, a dozen, 2 dozen, every year I go short-term mission trips. And there's some concern amongst some missionaries, and that the question is, what are we doing with that? And the question kind of gets down in some of the research. Does short-term missions actually lead to long-term missions? So how do you help someone? I'm not talking about, like maybe a senior saint who probably isn't ready or isn't able to move overseas, but especially younger people. How do you help guide them not to be just serial short-term missionaries, but really help them evaluate whether or not they should consider going career as a missionary?
That's a great question, Scott. I mean, it goes back to what I was talking about. It always goes all the way back to the preparation before they ever even got on the field. A heart that's properly prepared spiritually, a mind and a willingness is great to want to serve. But if you're approaching this from what can this mission trip do for me, then that's a very selfish way of approaching it, as opposed to truly seeing it as another actionable way of living like Jesus and letting Jesus live through you. And if that proper preparation and the time on the field, the application is reinforced in that person, then the hope is by the time that they return, the transformational process begins when they come home. And the follow-up happens. And that really falls in on the leader of the trip, or even the missionary that they served with, if they develop a relationship with them. And you begin to plant seeds of questions in their hearts. What did God show you during this time? What is it about going on these trips that you find spiritually fulfilling, not just, culturally fulfilling? What is it, that really does resonate with you when you're on the field? And helping them work through, hopefully they're going to say, seeing God use me in a different way, or seeing God's church serving different people and seeing how they respond to different ways. If the focus is back on God versus us, then it's not a big leap to get them to see beyond a spiritual tourism track, and really focus in on the heart transformation that God may be doing in them, and maybe, really just not awakened. They haven't been awakened to the fact that that's what that is.
Right.
And it's really helping them on the follow-up.
So we are at a disadvantage, though. I'm not a missionary. Jason, you're not a missionary on the field. And Scott, you're a missionary in the sense of being a church planter in the U.S., but you're not currently an overseas missionary. I think for those missionaries that are listening to this, they're thinking, you guys don't know what a burden it can be to host some of these teams. And sometimes we have to invent work for them, like painting that roof for the 12th time, because it doesn't always make sense to receive short-termers in that kind of a way. So what are some ways that short-term trips can be done that don't exhaust the missionary and the nationals?
Yeah, I like to use the tagline, and I read this somewhere, so I can't take credit for it, but it's turning these trips into a blessing for the missionary versus a burden. Because it can be exhausting to try to really focus in on where are these people going to stay, how are they going to eat, what can they do, and that's where I was trying to point to earlier when I was talking about coordinating with the missionary and the ministry to look at their ministry, look at what they have coming up, look at what God is doing in their specific area, in their region, and see, ways that additional people can help out, from the standpoint of not only resourcing bodies, but also you have to look at this as a possibility for the missionaries then to potentially create new, deeper relationships with those that come and serve there. At minimum, you're hoping that the people who came and served with you were praying for you in the ministry before they got there, and they will continue to do so afterwards. I'm not naive. I know that everybody's not going to do that, but if you're able to truly deepen a commitment and a relationship with 2 people out of the 10 that came on the trip, wow, that's 2 extra people that are praying for your ministry consistently, maybe giving financially, but definitely giving prayerfully. Right. And that alone is a great thing, but making sure that coordination happens between the missionary and the ministry partner on the field, and identifying really what needs to be done, and then working with the team to make sure that the right skill sets are coming. If there is a specific skill set that's needed, like I said, if this is a teaching ministry, you don't need to bring people who've never taught. There might be a few slots for people like that to do things behind the scenes, to run between classrooms, or to be kind of a gopher or whatever else, or to come and maybe take care of the missionaries' kids while the missionary's serving on the field with you doing the teaching thing or something like that. That's great. But the predominant ministry needs to have the right resources come with it. And then, challenging, the team on the field each and every day, to really get out of their comfort zone. And that's up to the leader, not the missionary. I'm a big believer on there being a leader that comes on the trip with the team that the missionary can liaison with, as opposed to the missionary having the responsibility to call somebody out if they're doing something that's culturally insensitive. They should be able to just have one person that they can go to and say, this person is doing this, and I don't think they mean anything by it, but this is what this is doing in the ministry. And then that leader needs to go take care of that. But the leader also each day can set up each day with a devotional to challenge people spiritually, to let God show them something new that day, and then have debrief sessions in the evenings where they're able to celebrate and talk about what God did, and to really challenge them. I mean, one of the things that I like to do is, use an object lesson to begin the day. Early on in the trip, one of the days, I'll do a devotion and I'll bring a spoon that's a shiny spoon, and I'll actually use it as an object lesson to talk about looking outside of ourselves and seeing what God is doing. And if you take a spoon and you look at it, in the concave side and you're facing it, your reflection's upside down and backwards. And my point to them is you're looking inside yourself. So you don't see things correctly. You're seeing them opposite of the way you should see them. But when you turn it over on the convex side, now all of a sudden the reflection is right. So you're looking outside of yourself. And then I'll take that spoon and I will give it to somebody that I can give a testimony, a 1-minute testimony of something they did the day before or the day before that was really outside of themselves, and tell them, now you have the spoon. Your job is to watch your brothers and sisters serving today and find somebody to give the spoon to. And then from that day on in the evenings, we follow up with, who got the spoon today? And hopefully it went through a couple of people's hands. But it's little things like that that can really kind of articulate that application side of things. And then the transformational side is follow up. And that's up to the pastor of the church that sent the team, the leaders of the teams that went, and even the missionaries. If it's a small enough team and they really develop that relationship, if it's 2 or 3 people, they probably had an opportunity to really develop a deeper relationship with them and helping them, really digest what we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I know, having been on both sides of that equation, there's some trips that we had that were very good and some trips we had that were pretty horrible and experiences we didn't ever want to repeat. And I do think that you hit on something that's really helpful, and that is having that leader and someone that is in charge and can debrief, and also so the missionary isn't in a constant position of policing every individual in that group. Because one of the situations I had was I had a young lady that she was very responsive to the advances of the guys that we were working with that weren't believers, and it was like, okay, you're actually hurting us because I'm having to confront them about leave this young lady alone, and it just created a real tense situation. And I can see that working through an organization and what you're like with your role now with ABWE can really help churches and missionaries to be able to cut out some of those difficulties and really prepare people well. So, I just want to encourage our pastors that might be listening, or our missions leaders, to take advantage of the expertise and the knowledge and the ability to put together a really effective trip. And so I thank you for that. I want to just follow up with another question in a different direction. Sure. Like David Livermore, I think, brings this out really well in his book, particularly, and that is the effect that constant mission trips can have on local ministries and even on people. Like, some studies have been done talking about, like, in orphanages, like constantly having the coming and going just sometimes can feed the abandonment feelings that some of these orphans have, that kind of a thing. Are you concerned at all about the effect that constant mission trips can have on a local ministry? And what are the kinds of things that you want to see happen at, like, ABWE, for instance, that can help mitigate against that?
Yeah, so I think it definitely is something that we have to approach with caution. And it's not only because of the abandonment that can potentially be felt by people as different groups cycle in and out, but it's also the dependence that can be developed. And I know that's one of the negative things that you hear a lot of the times in the articles talking earlier about those that call for mission trips to kind of come to a halt. We don't want to create a local dependence, but at the same time, you brought up Livermore. I think Livermore was the one who articulated that, 40% of the world lives on less than $2 a day. The U.S. Lives on more than $70 a day. So there's never going to be a time where we don't have the financial capability to be able to help, but we have to make sure that we're doing that carefully in how we do that so that we don't develop that dependence. And the constant cycling in of teams over and over can quickly develop that dependence of, well, we'd really love to do this, but we're going to wait for this team to come and give the money for that. And that's not the place we want to be. We definitely want to share the resources that God's given us for his glory and for the advancement of the gospel. But we want to do that in a cautious way, such that it really is focused on the blessing. It's the same thing when you're talking about the abandonment. We don't want to, perpetrate on any ministry in the field this idea that they're creating a touristic bus stop. of people cycling through right and left. And that's why I talked about the proper planning is so important. And that's why the missionary and the ministry on the field should be the ones dictating what is being done. They will know the heartbeat of what's going on in that village, in that culture. It could easily get away from, I've personally partnered with local churches, and the local churches that I partnered with, one of them in Africa, they would have always been fine accepting any team because they wanted more people to come because they were hoping that, more money would be given. But when you take a step back, and especially for our missionaries that are there, they will know, what's being done there. They will know the right way to approach this to make sure that dependency is not happening. And hopefully they'll be the ones that'll say, listen, we don't need more than 2 teams. We don't need more than 1 team. And they need to, they don't need to come except during this period of time and so forth. And we need to be able to honor that. And that's one of the beautiful things about ABWE is we have so many missionaries in so many ministry fields that our church partners can capitalize on trips without becoming cycling through the same one. And it's really, it always comes back to proper planning and execution. And the planning part of that is what's going to keep that from becoming a problem long-term, Scott.
Well, Jason, this is, I think it's encouraging. You and I have both seen the stats. There are hundreds, sometimes thousands of people visiting ABWE's fields short term in the course of a given year. But there isn't a strong, clear process right now for helping them take a next step beyond that. And so we're excited to see that begin to happen. But how can people learn more about what you're doing, the ministry that you're building, and connect with you?
So, I wish I could say that you just go to this website, but it's one of those things where we are early in the process. You guys talked earlier about the pandemic. There's not a lot of trips going on right now, which is the perfect time to be shoring up our foundation and our framework. So we're actually building frameworks and leader kits and participant guides and so forth that we're looking forward to making available to our church partners and to our missionaries to be able to utilize in the future. So there will definitely be more information that will be available here in the next coming 2 or 3 months. In time for hopefully, the vaccine to come through and us to be able to have our borders opened up and be able to move about, in other countries. So there's definitely more information to come. For right now, the best way to contact me if you have any questions is to send me an email at my ABWE email. And if you have the desire, you can always follow me on Twitter. The handle is @PhillipsJason. And I would, I don't do a lot of social media. But I do try to occasionally put some things out there that are really focused in on letting God kind of use you and show you and transform your mind and heart.
Love it. Very good. Jason, thank you so much for what you're doing. And everyone, we want to hear from you again in the future. And so would love to hear audience questions that you might have for Jason. And maybe it'll have a future conversation that we'll have to plan. But also be praying for this new and growing ministry that Jason's going to be building with us. And so good to hear from you today, brother, and look forward to talking soon.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. I had a good time.
To get more content, go to missionspodcast.com or check out abwe.org/podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share. To ask a question or suggest a topic, email Alex at missionspodcast.com, and we'll see you next time on the Missions Podcast.